All right, let's call this bad boy to order. We're at the top of the hour now. Let's get the first thing off the agenda here. All the orders accomplished. Seat alternate. We've got enough people here. We should be good to go there. Hearing of residents. I didn't see anybody signed up. We got any? At least somebody got it. Minutes. Did you all get the minutes this time? Yes. Yes, perfect. Does anybody have any amendments they would like to have made to the minutes as written? And can I get a motion to pass the minutes then?
I make a motion that we pass the minutes from our February meeting.
Second? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
All opposed? We'll pass the minutes as written. Public hearing. Sir. What is yours?
Are you ready?
Absolutely.
All right. Well, the first thing I want to do is apologize for the very opening page where I put the wrong date on here and didn't update it to March the 1st. So beyond that one little foofah there, we're going to go back to the 2018 code. And what I'm going to propose for y'all is some of the significant changes, not in our ordinances, but some of the changes that have occurred in the books. This will not be a comprehensive list, but it will be as some of the significant items that I thought should be brought before the commission to listen to or look at. One of the first things is in the IBC, exterior balconies and elevated walking surfaces. There's going to be a new requirement that they have to provide detailed directions on how these are to be built. Because of the number of balconies that have collapsed across the United States over the years, this was brought into the International Code Council, and they've adopted new standards for these. There have been, in the International Building Code, they did redo the items that are addressed as being classifications in use under R2 for apartment houses, living facilities such as boarding houses, convents, dormitories, fraternities, monasteries, hotels, living and work units, hotels and motels. If anyone has any questions on any of these, stop me and I'll answer any questions y'all may have. Another section that has been redone is Group R3, where they've included quite a new definitions, and this primarily is around boarding houses and lodging houses. I think this has a lot to do with the bed and breakfast.
I'll ask you a quick question here. Do these two changes have any impact on our crash pad thing?
I'm sorry, sir?
The crash pads where we're temporarily renting to...
that's what I was referring to by those bed and breakfasts. Is that what you're talking about?
Well, no.
No.
That's okay. I don't want to get any... I just was wondering whether this had any impact on definitions of those things.
No, not at this time. I think what you're talking about is more of a zoning-related item that we've talked about before.
Okay, thank you.
Mezzanines in commercial locations, there's been a little bit of a better definition. It describes what you can and can't do with a mezzanine as far as it being an equipment platform in combination with a mezzanine. And it gives some new limitations in the building code as to how that use is to occur. Another area is incidental uses where they have a stationary battery system because of what we just experienced with the cold. We're going to see more of these coming into play, and along with solar systems and generator sets on residential, commercial, industrial type facilities. This new code will have a definition in there where it's going to have to be separated by a 1 hour partition or 2 hours in certain locations. That's something new that's coming in. And then a crossover, which really surprised me, was electrical installations and transformers. There's going to be some new requirements that are actually referring back to the electrical code for what type of firewall and what type of egress is going to be necessary for a electrical installation, which I thought was very unusual. I was not aware ICC was even talking to the National Fire Protection Association, which they apparently are now. Occupant load, there's been some changes which are going to be beneficial to small businesses and to other locations in the city where they're increasing the size of the square footage per occupant to 150. Previously, it was 100. So you'd have a very small building, say 1,500 square foot, that would, because you're looking at the gross floor area, would normally require one or more restrooms or 2 restrooms, a bi-level drinking fountain, and a mop sink. By going up to 150 gross on the occupant load, that's going to drop that number. So it's going to help with the small businesses. Instead of having to put in 2 restrooms, they could be able to get by with 1. Don't necessarily have to have the drinking fountain, bi-level drinking fountain, so that's going to be substantial cost savings for the customers in the area. And then concentrated business uses, this is another big one. This is where we have the telephone call centers, trading floors, other similar businesses where you have these higher densities than what you'd normally see with 100 per square foot. Now I'll be able to use the actual chair seating or 1 occupant per 50. So that's going to be of a great benefit to us. The International Mechanical Code, this is just something I thought was interesting. For system controls for exhaust, that'll be the exhaust fans located in restrooms or in other areas that are exhausting from a kitchen going to the outside. Now those devices have to be identified as to use. Most of the time it's going to be pretty simple, but in a restroom or like in a kitchen, if you have a remote fan or something built into your Gen Air, you'll have a device now that's going to be labeled as an exhaust, and you'll be able to easily identify what it is. This is going to be new. This is actually a carryover from the fire code into the building code or into the residential code for when you have solar panels installed on roofs, assuring an egress pathway from that second floor. If you have a second floor area or a bedroom that's on the top of the second floor of the building, where that individual would have to use that window to escape. Now there's a requirement that the exit has to be easily defined, has to be at least 36 inches in width, has to lead to an exterior portion of the roof that can be egressed by that individual and provide for self-rescue. Another one is the setbacks. There's some requirements for that, which is normally 36 inches on both sides of a horizontal. So this is going to be in conjunction with the fire code. This section, I'm not for sure if it still exists in the fire code, but it's been moved over into the residential code also. So we'll be working in conjunction with the fire department to do these reviews and these on the plan reviews, and also to ensure that when we go out and do the inspections that all these requirements have been met. And this, again, goes back into the rescue openings that I was just referring to. Emergency egress and rescue panels, modules shall not be installed on the portion below an egress window. So I want to make sure that a child or an adult can easily exit that area and gain access off the roof. This is one I just brought up. I wanted to show this because this is a plastic pan under a gas-fired water heater. It can be constructed of a material which could be plastic as long as it has a flame spread of 25 or less or has a smoke index of 450 or less. In the International Plumbing Code, exactly the same thing. It says a plastic pan shall not be installed under the same gas-fired water heater. I don't know why there's a difference between those two. And that'd be up to y'all if y'all want to continue to accept that, or if you want me to change that and put that as a suggested alteration to remove that and have that continue in both the IRC and the IPC as the same standard. This is brand new. This is the National Electric Code. This is something that has been coming for a number of years. Everybody is familiar with arc fault and GFCI type devices or the combinations that they have in houses. Those devices are very prone to failure. There's been a lot of failures. So what the National Electric Code has determined through the National Fire Protection Association is the cause of this is overcurrent coming into the building from either phases slapping together, your neighbor's air conditioning unit, or a utility coming on and putting a voltage surge through the lines, causing these mini computers that are located in these devices to fail. So what they have now done is they have added a brand new section in the electrical code, both as part of Article 230 and as this section here at 242, over voltage protection, which requires either a T1 or T2 type device, which is, it's a metal oxide resistor to be installed at or near the service. And this is designed to prevent those surges from coming through the home into the house, destroying your electrical equipment. So this is the what the electricians have decided and have suggested as a alteration, and also coming from the manufacturers of these devices to help prevent those devices from failing so frequently. And this is the Article 230 where I was talking about, where it either has to be a type 1 or type 2, and this will apply even if the service is just being replaced on an existing home. So if the house has a service burned down, or if the service is being upgraded, these new requirements will go into play.
What kind of cost delta is that?
I'm sorry, sir?
What's the cost delta on that, roughly?
There's a bunch of different types. You can get the type that's a breaker that you can install, which goes to a MOV unit, which is installed on the side of the panel board, or it can be ahead of the main. And they run anywhere from $60, the ones I've looked at, to $150 or more,
So
depending on the device.
not a major.
Most of them are sacrificial in nature, so they're designed to take a surge and then die. I've seen both alarm, and I've seen both with just a light that comes on and tells you it's no longer functioning. I personally prefer the light and signal device. Now, some of our local amendments, and these are what we're asking y'all to consider for approval to take to City Council, is we deleted, this is in Article 1, this is the beginning of the code. We recommend that we've updated and deleted a lot of the wording to bring the codes into consistent with our digital processes and types of inspections we do now. We've also added changes to the licensing requirements for electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. There is currently a state bill out for the mechanical to have them comply with the same thing that the electricians and the plumbers do right now, which means the city cannot charge a fee for registration. So by doing this, we're actually ahead of the game. We're beating the state to the punch on the adoption of this code. Let's see, and this also pertains to the insurance requirements, no longer requiring those that are licensed by the state of Texas to provide that insurance to us. We'll be able to easily look online and verify the contractor actually has the insurance. Building code, we've added definitions for pergolas, arbors, and trellises under 300 square feet. We added definitions of what an arbor, trellis, and pergola is. And then we're asking that y'all consider and recommend to City Council that rooms and spaces for all handicap restrooms to have an emergency light fixture. And we're also asking for a requirement for an emergency light to be placed in the classroom near an exit, either at the primary or secondary. And the building code does, and I'm not going to cover it today, but the building code has adopted a lot of very stringent requirements for remote locking devices for these classrooms because of everything that's been going on in our days and times. I feel that this is a life safety feature, which I'd hope you all consider to recommend to City Council we adopt. We deleted 8 of the engineering foundation requirements, leaving only 2 documents. The rest of these 8 documents will be covered underneath the special inspections. We've updated our sound attenuation requirements for the certification process, which will be, the contractor will be able to sign for it. We've added an appendix for shipping containers where they're going to be utilized for permanent use, and along with a lot of requirements for that as far as details for how the units to be constructed, what letters we have to have or documents indicating that the structure is safe, and then also for foundation and placement, and also protection for surrounding neighbors that may be within 500 feet of the unit, having a approximate same value of construction and also the type of exterior attributes of the building. So if you got a 4-on-12 pitch on all the adjacent roofs, this structure will also have to have a 4-on-12 pitch. Or if it's all masonry around you, you got to have masonry on this. So there are some protections built into this new ordinance that I put together.
Another quick question. I thought the change in the laws last legislative session, we couldn't dictate.
Sorry, sir?
We could note the state withdrew. We don't have the authority to dictate construction materials anymore.
We don't, but what we're doing is stating that they just have to be the same materials as the surrounding structures. So if you say you have a $400,000 house and somebody wants to come in and build one of these containers next to you, they have to use similar components as what your house has been constructed of in order to maintain your taxable values or your home values so that you don't lose anything in your equity.
Okay, I understand that, and I certainly agree with it, but I just question the authority. Why we can do it here, but we can't continue to do it
Right, and I do agree with you on that, but one of the things that I did do is I copied it's called the Industrialized Housing and Building Code. This is their recommended ordinance adoption that I copied from their website.
I think you're talking more structurally also, correct?
Yeah.
So I think our Unified Development Code and the stuff that they are talking about has to do with the exterior elevations and how it looks on the outside. I think Gil's talking about the construction of it. And so I believe just like with all the other things in the building code, there are certain structural requirements. And I think that's, what you're talking about, more than just how pretty it looks, the aesthetics of it.
And then the last thing is we deleted quite a number of sections out of the local amendments where we had duplicate information that's already in the code books that we're adopting. So a lot of the codes that we had previously are now required nationally. 2018, we covered the same thing with arbors and trellises. We just adopted that straight across the board, and it goes both with residential and commercial. The foundation requirements, we added an exemption for engineered foundations that are under 300 square feet, where we provided the worst case scenario. Instead of you having to dig through the book, I wrote it all up, so it'd be simpler to design a foundation. It says 24 inches deep on the outside or to a bearing strata, gives you the type of rebar that you'd have to use, what the spacing is. I tried to include as much detail as possible to avoid the use of or requiring that individual wanting to do a small addition from having to employ an engineer. I don't think there will be any deviation in the amount of security or the stability of that foundation as long as they follow the minimum design standards. We did delete 7 of the engineering foundation documents. We're requesting that the board consider going down to 3 documents. We're receiving almost everything now that we need through our plan reviews and through our inspections. By reducing this to 3 documents, I do not believe that we will be reducing at all the amount of assurance that the customer is still getting a good, stable, reliable foundation in his home. We did add a table that's required by code. It's called Climatic and Geographic Design Criteria. It's very extensive. It covers details for wind loading, snow loading, atmospheric occurrences on the building, and then also it helps with designing the air conditioning system that you would have at this structure. We're recommending that the rough end water test be amended to the 2018 International Plumbing Code. The existing code, the existing residential code as it's written in the code would allow for a 5-foot water head to be placed in the home, and that it would be all you'd have to do to show that you don't have any leaks. The IPC still requires a 10-foot head. We're recommending that same standard be maintained for residential requirements also. That way you can get the water pressure, and that way you can assure there's no leaks within the system.
And I think I read in there not to exceed 1 foot over the plate line, so
Correct.
you don't have, I remember my plumber saying, what, I got to put it through the roof and then I got to get that plug out of there? Yeah.
The technical requirement would have been through the roof, and which I disagreed with, because who's going to climb on the roof to do that water test? And by just putting it 1 foot above the top plate, and you can put a ping pong ball into it and float it.
There you go.
That way you don't have to carry a ladder upstairs. You can see that it's full of water and that there's no leaks in the system. Of course, we're removing out of the IRC all the electrical references because state law governs that under the 2020 Electrical Code. We're recommending the adoption of Appendix M, home daycare, Appendix P, sizing of water pipe systems, Appendix Q, teeny houses, Appendix R, light straw, hay, clay construction, which is pretty popular up in Austin right now, Appendix S, straw bale, and then also Appendix U, which is shipping containers. We adopted it both in the IBC and in the IRC, so it has the exact same requirements. The 2020 Electrical Code, we're deleting branch circuit requirements for bathrooms because that's now covered in the new 2020. Minimum capacity covered in the 2020. Dwelling unit receptacle locations in bathroom, 2020. And then also 23070A, which is a requirement for services to be readily accessible. We added that to help define what is readily accessible. This is for both residential and commercial locations. The current 2020 National Electric Code does address residential homes as being readily or accessible, but it does not address commercial or industrial locations. Our current code takes it one step further. And the national code is just catching up with us. International Plumbing Code, we're deleting pipes through foundation walls. We're deleting testing exception for lawn irrigation systems because that's already covered under the plumbing code and the IRC plumbing code. We deleted table 702, sewer pipe for cellular core. We're just going to let the manufacturers or installation instructions mandate how that piping is to be installed. The plumbing code, we're also going on with deleted Appendix C, vacuum drainage systems, because this has been added to the code. It's actually a requirement now. It's in the chapters. And it was changed to Appendix C for structural safety, which was included. And then we deleted Appendix B, rates of rainfall. We kept Appendix D, degree and design temperatures, and Appendix C, sizing of water piping systems. And then the other codes, which we don't have any changes happening to, would be the International Fuel Gas Code, the International Existing Building Code, no changes. The International Swimming Pool and Spa Code, deleted the appendices because that was adopted by the state of Texas. It is now regulated through the Department of Texas Department of Human Services, I believe is what it's called. So it's mandated through the state now. And then we didn't make any changes to the International Existing Building Code. There's no changes to the 2018 International Property Maintenance Code, and there are no changes to the 2009 Manual Cross-Connection Control, which is the 2009 edition. We didn't recommend any changes. We just kept it as is, which defines where the location of these RP devices are for residential and for commercial industrial facilities. And that concludes my presentation. There are quite a few other slides with detailed or a lot more details on the some of the significant changes in the code books. That's the other 50 pages. If y'all want to see those, they'll be available, or if you want to talk about them now, I can run through anything that y'all would like to discuss.
I do have a question on the, I just happened to come across a situation on your backflows for the irrigation systems. One of the requirements is that it's a certain height elevation above the highest sprinkler head. And I know I've built houses with backyards upsloping or tiered where, you know, that thing's not going to be 20 feet in the air. So I don't know how that's addressed now. I know that yeah.
And then also, just before we get it too far of discussion, I want to make sure that we open the public hearing, invite anybody that would like to speak, close the public hearing, and then we can continue on with our discussion. Just as a reminder, I know sometimes we get kind of going on this stuff and forget a little bit about those things, so I just wanted to remind you. Thank you.
Okay, the RPZ devices that are required, or RP devices for lawn irrigation systems, are supposed to be installed 1 foot above the highest head. So you're correct that if you have an upslope, you have to run it back. And the same thing would apply when you have a flood zone. It's supposed to be located 1 foot above that 100-year floodplain, wherever that's at. So I have seen some devices that are up there on top of telephone poles. But in most cases, I don't think we have too many locations in town where the device, again, it says it has to be located somewhere near the front of the building.
Adjacent to the,
but in a case where you had a specific issue, it can be relocated to somewhere else where it can be more easily hidden. And again, I always recommend that an electrical outlet be placed adjacent to it, so if we have another freeze like we did last week or a week before, that the device can be taped if we have electricity.
yeah, there's that. All right.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? You want to open it first before I forget? At this time, I'd like to welcome anybody forward who'd like to speak on their behalf as the community members. We're going to open the public meeting, sorry, at 25 after. All right, public hearing closed.
Yeah, I read that. Thank you.
Yeah, the attic access
Yes.
requirements.
Go ahead.
Again, we did change it to where it shows it's equipment platform or storage access now. So that was altered in our ordinance. We did correct that. So any other location that can have a normal scuttle hole, if you want to put one in, it is still, you have to have one every accessible attic
Right,
area.
yeah, yep.
But it could be a scuttle hole. It doesn't necessarily have to be a pull down. So if there is no storage and there's no equipment, you can get by with a scuttle hole.
Good. Yeah, I like the way it was worded too. Pretty clear. Yes, sir?
Couple of things real quick. First of all, I was wondering about any feedback. Right after we met the last time, I think the following day, you were going to have a stakeholder meeting. Did that meeting take place?
Yes, it did.
And what was their overall reaction to your proposals?
The citizens that responded, I'll let Lisa.
It was the day right before the cold, too, or real close. We had two people show up. One was a builder, and the other was the chamber. Maggie showed up. Maggie had a lot of questions that we were able to answer for both building and fire. And even though there was two people, Maggie was very satisfied with what we presented.
Okay. And my other question concerns the need for emergency light fixtures in every classroom. Where's that coming from?
That was actually, I thought that was a code requirement for years. And because I was looking at emergency egress and pathways, and I had always assumed that the emergency egress and pathways inside of a classroom would start somewhere at the furthest point of a classroom and then exit out of that into the common exit corridor and then out of the building. After calling every other city up and down the I-10 and 35 corridor, they all thought it was the same thing too, but when I contacted the International Code Council, they assured me that it was not a requirement. And I asked why. I said, if you're having an after-hours activity where you're having parent meetings, you're having people unfamiliar with the classroom setting, where you have lots of tables and desks and you got people sitting all over the place on the inside, and it's pitch black outside and the lights go off, why would you not have an emergency light on?
Oh, okay. And to be honest with you, I'm kind of drawing a blank on whether we were requiring that or not, but the general emergency lighting requirements, unless they've changed, were 50 people or more was considered. If if the occupant load of a room was 50 or more, then you had to have emergency lighting, you had to have an exit sign. Not that it's necessarily a bad idea, but is this going to be a retroactive requirement?
No, sir. Only for new construction.
Okay.
Yeah, and the schools are evenly divided between having them and not having them. I've located them in both. Over here in Clemens, I found a lot in the existing portion of the school. And then when they were building the new schools, it went halfway with both Comal and the shirts as to who was requiring it, who wasn't requiring it. And I did 2 different plan reviews for 2 brand new schools or renovations, and one required it. The second one didn't require it. And then the first battle was, it was a battle because both John Perry and I both wanted to see him in there, and we lost. And then the second one, the same architect put them all in.
Yeah, it's part of my confusion is when we talk about emergency lighting, I tend to think of the wall packs. But I see a lot, I saw a lot of new construction even before I left where they were just, they were built into the fluorescent fixtures. So
That's the most common one.
unless you happen to look up there and see that little red light, you'd never know they were there. So that's why I'm thinking, in some cases, they may already be there, and I just
Most
don't
of
remember
them
it.
do exist in those locations. You do have to look for the little red lights A lot of them are retrofit, especially on you can even get them for these type of lights now, where you have a battery built into it to provide 90 minutes of battery operation, where it reduces not more than, I think it's from a 0.1 foot candle down to a 0.25, something like that for illumination value at floor level. And yeah, it's something that's easily retrofittable even on the existing schools, but I'm not asking for that. Only for new schools, new campuses coming on, which we will be getting one probably in another year or less, where I've already spoken with them and they had no problem adding it in, and they thought it was a great idea at that point.
What about for renovations in schools?
If they did renovations or something like that, then we'd recommend that those items be installed, because it is a life safety feature. And if you've ever been in a classroom, and my daughter's a teacher, it gives you an opportunity not to step over and fall over everything, because general classroom, you're going to have tables and chairs scattered hither and thither and yon. A lot of them are not in rows anymore, especially with the COVID. So if you're a parent visiting the teacher, looking at your child's artwork or looking at the child's work, you're meeting with the teacher and the lights go off, you got to remember, what did I have to walk around to get to the door or come into the classroom? So that's why we're making the recommendation, to allow those individuals that might be in that classroom that are unfamiliar with the layout to have a reasonable chance at self-rescue.
I think I'm good with it. I always think about the cost delta, but it can't be that much in the grand scheme of things. Is it? Yeah.
That's the same thing with the restrooms. There is a new requirement in the 2018 code for bathrooms, anything over 300 square feet. And I did call the Department of Justice because I was looking at it as an ADA issue. And they wouldn't give me a straight answer. All they would do is tell me that it's a reasonable accommodation. I said, what's that mean? Exactly what I said, sir. It's a reasonable accommodation. Yeah. Thank you all, and I really appreciate you all letting me do this presentation, and appreciate everything you all do.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
So this item is an action item. So the discussion, if y'all are finished with your discussion, you would proceed forward with either making a recommendation to City Council to approve, deny, or if you need more discussion, continue your discussion, or if it needs more, to even table to another meeting.
You see a motion to further discuss the presentation as written. Is there anything else you'd like to go over and think about before making this recommendation to the City Council?
I think I'm okay so far with what I see, depending what the other folks at the table think.
Make a motion on the presentation we just received to be adopted and presented to City Council for approval.
Can I get a second?
A second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed? Motion passes. Next on the docket, public meeting to consider church fire code now.
Good evening, Cade Long, Fire Chief. And so what I tried to focus on here, I know last time we kind of went through some of the specifics of some of the changes, and so now kind of what we've went to now to more focus in on it is on the left side is what was kind of in the code, and on the right side is what we're adding. Most of these first few slides in Chapter 1 is just kind of clean up language or taking what was in the previous amendments and bringing them forward into this amendment. Is pretty much not a whole lot really new in Chapter 1 here under scope and administration. Right of entry, all this was in the previous amendments as well. and we're just asking to bring it forward as well, and just cleaned up some of the language in 104.3.2 for more photographic documentation. Again, here on 105 section here is, again, something that we've had before, and just bringing it forward, pretty much just asking for a occupant letter, occupancy classification letter, so that we know the commodities that's going in the particular business. So we've just listed some things for that occupancy classification letter to include. Again, that was in the last ones we're just bringing forward.
If I could insert something here real quick, Chief, just to help my fellow commissioners. This occupancy letter is used during the plan review, and it has a lot to do with designing the sprinkler system to the correct standards. That it's really helpful to know what they intend to put in the building so that you can ensure that the fire protection systems are designed correctly. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
So if you got like a magnesium factory, right, a water sprinkler is not going to help you out. That type of situation.
Well, it could be, or they could design, it may require a pump, you know, a large diameter pump system be put in place with more heads, more, you know, so not for magnesium, but I mean, just the general sense is high pile tires, you know, is going to require something different. So that's important that we know at that point, but it basically makes the appropriate system be designed based on exactly what's there.
There are quite a few variables, and you know, it has to do, as the chief said, it has to do with what you're storing, how high you're storing it. Is it wrapped in plastic or not? Is it in cardboard boxes? Or there's all kinds of, in addition to what's the product itself, and all of those things impact the design requirements, sprinkler spacing and water flow requirements, and all those kinds of things. So it's, for a long time, what we were doing is if the contractor couldn't tell us exactly what he was putting up the building for, we made him design it to worst case. So this just makes it a lot easier for the fire department folks.
And it's more focused on the installation for the design company. You know, they don't have to, you know, do the whole building that way. They can do a little different in each area based on what the classification is showing in those areas. Again, just we've added you all in here to the next one, so that just puts that in the amendments as well on what the process is and where it's established. Removal of occupants and occupant load has been exceeded. This again just is something that's brought forward. If we, you know, go out to a particular business and they're over the occupancy load, it just gives us the authority to get them back under the occupancy load. Again, just some of the definitions, most all of this is just coming forward from the previous amendments as well. Just pointing out there may be a couple of word changes in fire watch, and you know, like police officers may have been added in there as being able to complete fire watch as well, but for the most part all of this is just definitions that have been brought forward.
Chief, would you rather take questions as you go, or would you rather I wait till the end?
Just interrupt me as you go and we can do it slide by slide.
Well, my note here on foster care family home, there is a definition in the International Fire Code that's a little bit different. So is this meant to supplement that definition or replace it? I guess would be my question.
The I don't recall that in there, so I'll have to.
Well, I'll tell you the difference is the word family. In the IFC, it says, I believe it says foster care home, and it talks about 5 or fewer children 2.5 years of age and under is their definition, but the word family isn't there. So that was my question, is if you intended to replace that or use this as to supplement that definition. So.
No, I mean, the way that we have it set up in here would supplement, because otherwise, we would have had it in there from that code, using it that way, so this would be to supplement.
Okay, I mean, the keys are there, 6 or fewer, so I think it says no more than 5, so, yeah. But it might be something you want to take a look at, so.
Okay, again, this is something that we kind of updated last time with the mobile food establishments. And so again, just over on the right, we've added special events. So that's one of the new things that come in this code, that the occupant load, you know, based on some of the new wording in the new code is going to put more requirements in place for some of those events as well. So we just kind of defined special event on this one, so not a whole lot new in this one. Moving on to chapter 3. I guess looking at chapter 307.6, so I guess this has come about before with some memorial services or birthdays or some of that type of stuff. Is kind of how we've ended up here with 307.6, you know, sky lanterns, and so that's something that you know, brought our attention to it before, because we've had like 300 people at a memorial service that were all going to light candles in a sky lantern and let them float off into the community. So that's how we kind of ended up putting this in here from that standpoint. Or the other one just here on open flame on 308, open flame cooking charcoals. You know, this is meant to be at multifamily residentials. And so it's essentially saying here, we're deleting the exceptions here to cook out on a balcony and say that you have to move 10 foot away from the structure to barbecue at a multifamily dwelling. In here, this is just a requirement we've had from early 2000s, where we're just saying that a sprinkler system be installed at 10,000 square foot instead of 12,000 square foot. Chapter 4, again, this was all just brought forward as well, but this just kind of lays out some of the fire drills and stuff for schools. Nothing new in this particular area.
And the obvious question here was, doesn't the state have requirements? And so I looked them up. And yes, they do, but it also says if the local authority has requirements, then the school shall follow those. So.
And they've got to maintain records of those as well. Again, just clean up language here from the UDC on this chapter 5 here. most all of this, like you said, is just directly, was out of the UDC and/or engineering.
Yes, sir. Can you just clarify something for me? It says basically the width is 24 feet except where a fire hydrant is located on a fire department access road. So does that mean it has to be more than 24, or it can be less than 24 if the fire hydrant takes up part of that space? Okay.
Again, a lot of this is based on our equipment that we have, the size of our apparatus.
And again, if I can jump in here, again, for my fellow commissioners, I did a lot of comparison between what the chief and the fire department were proposing and the actual fire code. And turning radius, grade, angles of approach and departure, that's all left up to the building code. The fire code basically says as defined by the authority having, so.
Yeah, and so just for your knowledge, what we do on a lot of those is we look at the actual specs on our apparatus, and usually the biggest apparatus that we have that we'll be using for that particular design, and that's what we base our code off of, just for your knowledge.
And that angle of approach and departure, even in your car, your front bumper sticks out. Well, it sticks out even a lot more in fire trucks, and all that angle of approach and departure is how steep can that be so they're not going to hit their front bumper as they try to go up that driveway.
Or leave
Or leave it, drag the tail in.
That drove me to a question was, I didn't see anything addressing speed bumps in there. That's got to be a factor as well, right? Is having something high enough that scrapes the bumper or even the undercarriage as you depart or arrive.
Yeah, most of ours, from a height standpoint, just it hadn't been an issue from standard speed bumps. So most of our height clearance is well in excess of those on the engines and apparatus, and of course brush trucks. So we just haven't had it be an issue from a height standpoint. Again, just on the right here is just most of it's coming forward from the previous as well.
When you struck out mountable curbs, was that just meant that we were not going to approve a mountable curb, or just it was?
Say that, I didn't hear you at first.
You have a section in 503.2.1 where we struck out mountable curbs. And I was just curious if I just put in a bunch of mountable curbs, but it wasn't in the fire lane. If that was no longer going to be an approved, basically where you have a small little curb to get into your driveway, and that was struck out. I was just curious why.
No, on all of that was brought forward.
Just brought forward,
I think
okay.
That's just going to be language that's in the development.
Gotcha, all right.
Again, all of this is pretty much brought forward as well, just talking about removing vehicles that are parked in front of fire hydrants or in a designated fire lane.
It's like in the movies when you break both windows and pull the hose through.
Yes. Again, this is just talking about, again, back to the code, not really defining, so, just saying gates open in 15 seconds, so just putting a number in there for the code is what this is doing here on emergency access gates or HOA gates. And again, just this is cleaning up to on the addresses, just saying that, instead of them being in all different places on buildings, we're just going to go with the top right and so that's something that we tell, our firefighters look in the top right first for addresses and stuff when you're going by. So we're just trying to standardize that for the department on where they're looking. Knoxbox again on this one is just, we use Knoxbox as the business that we use, that we store keys in and require businesses to participate in that program. Yeah, most all the water is directly from the engineering or public works. Engineering. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah, I try not to read every slide to you. Just pick some of the stuff. So, okay.
If, because we saw the building department, in their amendments and adoptions, they eliminated a lot of duplication. And that question here is if these things are already defined in another city code or requirement, is it really necessary to put them in the fire code?
So we've talked about that, and like I said, most of what you're seeing here is coming directly from engineering and what they're using and or public works. So this just puts it into a code format and has something to stand back on and allow people to see what it is. And so that's why, we try to do get rid of a lot of the duplications and stuff, but we just feel like this part is just kind of clean up, but it's also important to us coming from the fire side on water. So that's why we felt it was important enough to kind of keep in here so that it does become, from the fire department standpoint, a code enforcement side from the fire department on these particular things when it comes with water. And this 510 is just talking about who's performing testing, so the entire chapter was changed. And so this just lists the requirements for who is submitting tests or what the requirements are whenever they're testing for these. Some of these were radio as well. Our radio transmissions have to work with inside a structure, and so if we're having issues with it, then this requires testing be done.
Do we have any of these installations, Chief?
I
know it was starting to become an issue right about the time I retired.
Started getting a few. We've still been working with some of the schools and stuff, but we've also worked with some of the businesses, so still not many of these. Okay, chapter 7, just real quick, a lot of this kind of goes along with, this is another one of those areas where we work closely with Gil on some of the protected wall openings and stuff. And so while the building code will talk more about having to have the firewall after the firewall's there is kind of when fire becomes more involved with it as well. So This is just some cleanup language to augment what's in the building code.
Trying to visualize where this stencil would be. Is it, it's above the ceiling line? Is that in this?
Yeah, on above, like on a drop ceiling, it's up above.
So, yeah, so some guy who's not going to go in there and drill a hole and stick a PVC pipe with it. Okay, got it. And this is in commercial, or this is?
Yeah, commercial. Again, Chapter 9 gets into in depth about the sprinkler system as well, and so this is again what we talked about with the 10,000 square foot requirement here. And
If I might make a suggestion for when this goes before council, it might help them to know what in other words, we're proposing, and we've always required above 10,000 square feet. What is in this case, I think the code says 12,000. So it might be helpful for them to see what the code requirement is if we don't amend it, to give them a better feel for, are we really asking for that much? And then on A1, when I look at the 2018 fire code, they have item number 4, 903 for a multiplex cinema. Did you intend to leave that out of your list?
on which one?
Right there, Group A1. The code says, basically it says the fire area exceeds, I think in the code it says 12. The fire area has an occupant load of 300 or more. That's out of the code. Number 3 is out of the code, but then they also have a number 4 that says if it contains a multiplex cinema.
No, that wasn't.
So
I think, when we looked at that, most of that, I think, was falling under A3, so that's probably just a miss because of the A3, and most of that falling under that. So, and we'll get further. Again, I think this is what our marshal had previously pointed out, that this was a change, and this is the reason for amending the code as opposed to repealing and replacing. But this leaves the requirement that we currently have in place for residential homes over 5,000 square foot to be, have a residential sprinkler system installed. And so this is just pointing out that we've had that, and this is just bringing it forward to maintain.
yeah, Chief, if you wouldn't mind, I had a couple of comments that you kind of moved on a little fast. For Group E, in addition to the square footage requirement, the current code, or the proposed 2018 code, also has an occupant load of 300 or more, in addition to the square foot requirement for a Group E. And then under Group M, item 4, where you talk about display and sale of upholstered furniture, the 2018 code has a square footage requirement in there. So did you intend to delete that and just say, if you know?
No, this is leaving it with what's in the code.
Okay, so any group in occupancy that displays or sells upholstered furniture, regardless of square footage, would have to be sprinklered. That's your intent?
Yes.
Okay. and again, I'll jump in here and say 2 or 3, well, it was probably further back than that. State law now prohibits municipalities from enacting ordinances that require fire sprinkler systems in 1 and 2 family dwellings. We were the city of Schertz, this requirement was grandfathered because this ordinance was in place prior to the legislation. And so we kind of have to be careful how we approach this thing, so that we don't, as long as we keep the ordinance that we had and just change it now and then, I think we're okay.
Yeah, as long as we amend and instead of repeal and replace, that's what this particular one is talking about. And so that's why you'll see some different language between the building code and fire code when it comes to like the ordinance language and stuff, because, and mostly all revolving around this particular item here, in that we're amending our ordinance, and where you might see building saying replace or repeal or something like that, but ours will say amending, and it's so that we maintain this requirement that we were grandfathered in with here.
Okay, I think we skipped again. Group S1, 903.2.9.1, item number 4, a Group S1 fire area used for the repair of commercial motor vehicles where the fire area exceeds 10,000 square feet.
You give me the number again.
Yeah, 903.2.9.1, repair garages. Item number 4, the 2018 International Fire Code says 5,000 square feet, where you're suggesting 10. So this is one of those, I think, where maybe we got caught up. You might want to look at it. I think maybe we got caught up in the 10,000 and just see if you don't want to stick.
You're talking that's back. Okay.
Yeah, I don't see it on your slide. Okay, but what I'm reading off of is that towards the end of the agenda items, you published the clean, or what the new ordinance would look like. Yeah, and this is on page 15.
Well, so if it's not on here listed specifically, then it is what's in the code. I mean, we're leaving at the 5,000 square foot.
It's not on your slide, Chief, but it's in your. It's in the rewrite of section 30 of the
Gotcha.
municipal code.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
I'll check that. There. In the text version, you're saying?
Yes, not in the red lines, but in the clean version. It's if it'll help you, it's on mine says page 15. Okay.
And generally speaking on these, if it's not addressed here, then we're just going with what's in the code. Others than that, so we'll look at that and see. Again, this is just to summarize. This is talking about adding a notification devices on a building that has a sprinkler system in it. So that's summarizing.
Yes, thank you. I always found it hard to believe that a fire code would require, and it is possible. You look at these warehouses we have in the industrial area, and they were required to put in a sprinkler system, a monitored sprinkler system, that when the sprinkler system activated, it would send an alarm to a central station, but it wouldn't bother to notify anybody in the building. That always defied logic.
Surprised whenever the fire department showed up. So that's primarily what this is cleaning up. and putting in our amendments.
I've got a question for you here, Chief. I certainly agree with everything you've written here. And, you know, again, I've been out of the business for a while, but NFPA 72, the fire alarm code, does it not address any of these?
It does, and we actually talked about this, and it's been, again, something that was brought forward in our code, and so we had talked about whether or not to remove it, but we also talked about adding, you know, the number 11 there is a new add about the big fans that are in that they shut down whenever the fire alarm system goes off as well. So that's something that we added. And so that is something that we discussed a little bit, leaving it just at the NFPA 72 language. And we have done that in a couple other places, so it wouldn't be out of the question to do that here, so.
Well, you know, in some ways, it's a plus. It's kind of that one-stop shopping where somebody doesn't have to look through 2 or 3 documents. But I will, when we get around to the general comments, I'll kind of come back to this.
This was, again, talking about, we've got in there some, just talking about section of the code. Again, this kind of goes along with what we were talking about a few minutes ago about notification systems. Put my glasses on for this one. Again, a lot of this is answering the questions in the code where it says local officials determine. A lot of this is adding that on how many feet we use it on there, and so that's defined. And again, not a whole lot of change here. Most all of this is just coming forward from the previous amendment. Same with this is just coming forward as well. So again, this was just kind of going along with what Gil was talking about earlier. Urgency illumination.
Okay, and again, if I can, I guess it wasn't in your slide, but on page 18 of your text document, Chapter 10, Means of Egress, 1003.8 Special Provisions, rooms in E-occupancies used for children of daycare, children 5 or under, classified as an E-occupancy shall not be located above or below the first story. I thought that was a requirement somewhere else, that they couldn't be, or am I just thinking too far back? I'm sorry, I sold myself short. I didn't have enough time to really research it, but I thought there was a requirement somewhere else, either in the fire code or the building code, that said you couldn't have a daycare or something like that above the first floor.
Yeah, it's been in the fire code.
Okay.
Can you give me that number again?
Well, yeah, it's 1003.8 special provisions. And again, my follow-on comments, hopefully you'll understand where I'm coming from when we get there. Thank you.
Again, on Chapter 11, I know we talked about last time the change in A2 where alcoholic beverages are consumed in an occupant load of more than 300. They went back to retrofit these facilities at this time. So with all that's going on with COVID and all that, we've just kind of proposed over here a 3-year window to kind of come into compliance with that. So looking for some feedback on that.
Okay. A2 is one when we were going through the list of sprinkler requirements, we left out A2 because the code requires a sprinkler system. It's an occupant load, I thought, of 100 or more.
Yeah, this is an existing.
Okay, because then we went down, you dropped down to your A3, which is 300 or more, but then you added the caveat that said if they serve alcohol, then they have to comply with A2.
Yes.
So if I've got an existing A2, like I do up on the interstate, and he went in, the building, the business went in before the sprinkler requirement change. So we've been watching him, or again, I was watching him. We limited him to 100 or less. So, but what I'm seeing here is you would now allow him to go to 300 before he has to put in a sprinkler system. Is that correct? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's the way we interpret the new 2018 code.
And this is one of the few instances where you're requiring retrofit.
Yes.
We don't. You folks don't do that very often.
Right.
Yes.
Very rare in the code to require retrofit.
Yeah, because we had 2 particular buildings we talked about last time doing that. It's helping them.
DFW and
Knights of Columbus.
Knights of Columbus, yes, was the 2 that we kind of identified. And this is what, again, we've seen some in New Braunfels as well as went through this as well. So.
Yeah, again, this comes back to the, as a fire code official, somebody would ask me a question, and what's the standard answer? It depends, okay? You look at, and let's use the Knights of Columbus. Well, heck, let's use the Civic Center back here behind us. Whether it's an A3 or an A2 or wherever it falls depends on what they're actually doing in there. The Knights of Columbus down here, if all they're doing is bingo with no alcohol, it's what, an A3. But if they've got a bar, now it becomes an A2. And it just, it's enough to drive a fire guy crazy, right? Yeah, shake your head. No, I just hope and the building code's a lot the same way. A lot of stuff, the answer is it depends. And I just want to communicate to my fellow commissioners that, some of these things are pretty complicated. It's just not as straightforward as it may seem. Thank you, Chief.
Yeah, again, as you see here on the dispensing facilities, just to add a emergency disconnect. Yeah, I think the only change on this one was going to 6-inch numbers. That's most of it, so we can still, anything else, Glenn, that you thought of that we need to further look at or clarify? You know, that's really what our amendments are.
We hit them all. And I apologize, but, you know, these things are near and dear to my heart, so. But I think, again, another public hearing, right?
I'd like to open it up here at 1960. Is there any members of the community who would like to participate? All right, then I close the public hearing. I'm reading on the NAVSA website that I think Mr. Outlaw is 100% right that there are some retrofit requirements in the International Fire Code, but there are some loopholes where retrofit might not have to be required. It talks about the way that the floor plan is outlined, that in some cases you could have firewalls that segregate certain areas, and then now you're different. Maybe not all the buildings here need to be retrofitted. Maybe there's a loophole here.
Well, during my term as fire marshal, and I'm fairly certain it's continued under Chief Long and his fire marshal folks, that the code often will provide alternatives. And the example that comes to mind is Abel's Diner. Have any of you eaten up at Abel's? Okay. We ran into a snag when he came in because the space had been vacant. It meant the city's criteria for a change of occupancy. So now he had to meet all the current fire code requirements, which included a fire sprinkler system. Now you read the code, and it's not just his space. The entire building had to be sprinklered. Okay. The chairman mentioned there's an exception when in the fire code. It used to be just a straight 4-hour wall. Now I think it can be, there are 2, 3, and 4-hour walls. But an area that's separated, and a firewall goes from the floor either to a fire-rated ceiling, or it goes through the roof. And there's some other requirements. It's different than just putting up a wall that goes to the ceiling. But once you put up that firewall, instead of having one building, you now have 2. So what we worked out for Abel up there was that room to the left as you go in the door, that what used to be a separate room, that's a rated firewall with automatic closing doors. And by doing that, he avoided the cost of a fire sprinkler system. Well, not just him, but the building owner. So yes, sir, there are, and Schertz has always been very open to alternatives as long as they meet the intent of the code. So as long as
words we use a lot, the intent.
As long as I'm talking, Chief, the general comment I wanted to make, here's what you're up against, because I faced this on another commission. We have a city council, and you know it's their prerogative as a city council, but they're looking for simpler, less intrusive, more flexible codes. They're not totally hands-off, okay, but they're really a group of people that wants to see less government regulation. And that's what you're up against with your amendments. And so that's why I was asking if it was already somewhere defined somewhere else, did you really want to put it in this document? Again, I think there are advantages to that, particularly for the person trying to develop a project. He's only got to look in one place. But that might be something you keep in the back of your mind as you go forward. And I think it's important when you do get to council that there may have to be a little, education is probably a strong word, but they're not going to know a lot about what you're talking about. So if there's anything, you can throw in there. For instance, you were talking about the stores connector. Does anybody up here other than me know what a stores connection is? Saying, well, next time you see, and they're on the new fire hydrants, but they're those big, Schertz Fire Department uses 5-inch supply line. They use that big connection on the fire hydrant. And what a stores is, it's a twist lock. So it allows you just to pop a cover off and twist your hose on there. Okay? But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. It may help, and again, particularly in the sprinkler requirements, if you show them that it's currently 12 and we're only, we're just knocking 2,000, it might make it easier for them. I'm not sure they really understand exactly what you're, so just some observations and some comments, okay? Yeah, I was wondering if the builders at the other end had.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot about R1, and that's about it. And that's actually something that, as we're going through here, probably could have helped me a little. I could have looked it up before I came, but some of the commercial classifications of.
Well, let me share another story with you, if you don't mind, Chief. Because the chairman noticed it as whatever he was scrolling through. The code often requires options. Well, let's look at La Quinta. It's 4 stories because you can't go 5 with anything over 4 has to be masonry construction. But they had that huge attic space, okay? That entire building was sprinklered except for the attic because the code gives you a choice. You can sprinkler an attic space or you can divide it into fire-rated compartments. That's how all these new apartment complexes are being built. And they all choose to go with let's cut it up into fire compartments. And you saw how well that worked at La Quinta, okay? So it's well, it's one of those things, the building codes, the fire codes, they're all what we call consensus codes. And when you look at the groups that make these codes, they're comprised of builders and contractors, fire protection people. They're the whole gamut of what the city calls stakeholders are represented. And so they sit there and they have to find a position that's agreeable, not necessarily to the majority, but it's a consensus code. They've got to find something that most of the people agree with. And so they start out by saying these are the minimum standards, okay? Because that's the best you can do with a consensus. And so what the chief and what Mr. Durant, what Gil have done here is they try based on local knowledge and their own personal experience is they try to improve on those minimums a little bit.
No, it's been an eye-opener for me because all my construction is 5,000 square feet and larger, and it's all design build. So a lot of this has been like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And some of it I've challenged my life safety fire guy, engineer, and so I'm really glad we've gone through this. I thank you.
Are there parallels in the building code that give you that same if-then statement that if you have this type of dwelling, then you can either do A or B or not necessarily a loophole? I don't think that's the correct term.
Yeah, it depends on our application. Like when I build for the Air Force versus the Army, even though it's for the military, they still go, well, no. They have a little wiggle room, like, you know, the firewalls. We'll build a firewall from something to get them out of having to sprinkler a certain size building. But learning this commercial residential has been a really good experience for me. So, but it's the military. We can do just about, we do whatever we want anyway. I have one question.
Yes.
Hot work permits. I don't remember seeing anything. What do you require for hot work permits?
Ben, I don't think there's no amendment for that, so it's.
Okay, I was just
straight out
curious
of-
because that was one thing I didn't see.
Straight out.
Okay,
That's probably in there on that section that talks about operational permits or something. There's a whole list of things that you need the permits for. So,
just curious.
Permits, are you referring to a built-up roofing system with an asphalt kettle?
No. When we build, as we're building, we have to get hot work permits. And I have hot work, and I have to have fire watch for 3 hours after we get through welding, torching, whatever
Yeah.
we're doing that day.
It's welders, but my favorite is plumbers with torches, okay?
So, yeah, I even have to have a fire watch for that.
But, yeah, we saw them pop up a couple years ago with conditions being so dry, the county was requiring that for fence work. If there was any welding being done on fences, they required permits.
In the summer when it's dry.
Yeah, I don't know that we see a whole lot of that kind of work in the city. But yeah, that's the other comment I'll throw out there. There is a lot, and if you ever have a boring day, it surprised me, but apparently they've become relatively open. All I did was Google 2018 IFC, and up popped a link to the ICC, and it would allow me to read the entire building code, the entire fire code. It used to be I couldn't do that. I had to subscribe to this stuff, but now they're all there if you're ever curious. And I would suggest that in the future, if anything ever comes to us as an appeal, that that's probably one thing we'd want to do is go out and look at the code itself. So,
Yeah, that's really the only difference that it provides now is you got searching capabilities and, more. That's really the only difference now because it's all available.
but where I was going with that comment is that there's a whole bunch of stuff in the 2018 fire code that we haven't talked about because they're just adopting it. They're not proposing to amend it, so they haven't bothered to. Yeah.
This is an action item as well, right? It sounds like there's some changes you still want to make before we give this to city council. With some definitions and purposes with housing, furniture, and the like. Is that true?
Yeah, just to review.
Well, I talked to Chief Long earlier, and I think currently, Lisa, you said this is on the agenda the 23rd, or at least that's the plan, right? So the question I asked the chief, because based on his answer, I would have, I might have made a proposal to the group, whether or not he's comfortable, and maybe it's an easier way to put it is, I've pointed out some things to him that he may want to look up. The question is, do we need him to look at those things and come back to us one more time, or are we comfortable taking action and just knowing that he will, it's kind of what the group wants.
Clarification.
Well, I guess then I'll take that as a motion. Do we have a motion to consider whether Mr. Long is prepared enough to go in front of the city council?
I make a motion that Chief Long can make these correction or additives, and that we should entrust him in doing that, and that we should,
You can make that part of your recommendation to city council as well, so you could add that to the end of it.
and make it a recommendation to city council.
Get a second.
A second.
Discussion.
Yep, so to clarify, our motion is we're going to recommend the city council accept this fire code with the caveat of some clarifications that we're trusting him to do. Is that, all
Absolutely.
right, beautiful. I accept that.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 All opposed?
Oh, second? Okay, thank
Can I get a motion to adjourn? If there's anything else?
I haven't made a motion yet today. I just clarified one. I'll motion we adjourn.
I second.
All right, discussion. I doubt there's any. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, cut you off.
Aye.
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 Ready for a nap. All right, that motion passes 1931. Call it a day. Blame Lisa.